We're so glad that you're joining us for this evening's program, History and Highballs Roper House. My name is Stacy and I handle adult education here at the museum. So whenever you join us for one of these H&H programs, you and I get to virtually spend the evening together listening to some incredible stories about North Carolina places and people and what makes our state so incredible. As a special part of tonight's program, we have 2 books available through our wonderful museum shop, Adventures with Old Houses, and then also More Adventures with Old Houses, The Edgewater Experience, both by Richard Hampton Jenrette. You can purchase either of these books by coming into the museum or ordering them online at ncmuseumofhistoryshop.com. If you enjoyed tonight's program, we invite you to head over to the museum's website at ncmuseumofhistory.org, where you can learn more about our upcoming programs, exhibits, and digital resources. This is also where you can find more information about joining our North Carolina Museum of History Associates. Our associates and foundation provide crucial funding and support to the museum, which in addition to many other things, helps make programming like this evening's event possible. We would also like to thank all of you who donated funds towards this evening's program. We continue to do our best to keep our programs free to attend, but there are costs associated with keeping our series going. And we just wanted to thank you all so much for your continued generous support of the museums and its programming. A few quick housekeeping items for this evening. We ask that you please keep your mics muted throughout the entirety of the program and to please type any questions that you have for our guest speaker into the chat function located at the bottom center of your screen. At the end of the program, our intern, Bobby, will ask our speaker as many of your questions as time allows. So it is my honor to introduce and welcome back this evening's speaker, Grant Quertermous, who is the Curator and Director of Collections for Classical American Homes Preservation Trust, the organization who owns and operates Roper House and 4 other historic houses in New York and South Carolina. Prior to his arrival at CAHPT in August of 2020, he served as curator of Tudor Place Historic House and Garden, a national historic landmark in the Georgetown neighborhood of Washington, D.C. for 5 years. Prior to that, he was the assistant curator at James Madison's Montpelier for 9 years. His book, A Georgetown Life, The Reminiscences of Britannia Wellington Peter Kennan of Tudor Place, was published by Georgetown University Press in October of 2020. He holds an undergraduate degree in history from Murray State University and a master's degree in anthropology from the University of South Carolina. Grant, welcome back. Thanks so much for being with us tonight.
Thanks, Stacy. I'm very happy to be back with you all this evening to focus on Roper House, our property that, as you noted, is located in Charleston. So I'm going to share my screen here, and there we go, get in presentation mode so everybody can see my slides. So as I said, we're going to look at Roper House, located down on East Battery at almost the very tip of the peninsula that is the city of Charleston, South Carolina. August 31st, 1886 started out just like any other late summer day in the city of Charleston. Around 9:50 p.m. that evening, the city was struck with a powerful earthquake. Lasting less than a minute, the earthquake had an estimated magnitude of 7.0 and could be felt as far away as Boston and the island of Bermuda. Railroad tracks were twisted and bowed, masonry buildings collapsed, and there were at least 60 fatalities. Luckily, Roper House survived relatively unscathed, but next door, the portico of William Ravenel's house actually collapsed onto the street. The north and east facades of Roper House were cracked, as you can see in these photos, requiring patching and earthquake bolts, but Charleston city engineer pronounced the house in good condition. The 1886 earthquake wasn't the first disaster that Roper House survived, nor would it be the last. Roper House was purchased by Classical American Homes Preservation Trust's founder, Richard Hampton Jenrette, in 1968. Not yet 40 years old, Jenrette purchased Roper House after seeing it during a moonlit stroll one balmy summer evening in Charleston with several friends. Later in life, Jenrette made no secret of the fact that he'd purchased the house for $100,000, then considered an astronomical sum for Charleston real estate. And I should mention that the tradition in Charleston is of referring to a house after its first owner. So that's why we continue to identify this house as Roper House after its first owner, who I'll discuss in just a moment. Dick Jenrette was a self-confessed houseaholic whose success as a founding partner of Donaldson Lufkin Jenrette, a Wall Street investment bank, allowed him to pursue his hobby of buying and restoring historic houses and furnishing them with his collection of art, antique furniture, and decorative arts. Recognized for his preservation efforts, Jenrette served on the board of the National Trust for Historic Preservation and was appointed chairman of the President's Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. Roper House would be a home that Jenrette and his partner Bill Thompson would return to for the rest of their lives. And it served as the location for some very memorable parties during his 50 years of ownership. Jenrette later wrote that, quote, "My love affair with Roper House was just the beginning of what has turned out to be a fascinating lifetime career of restoring classical American homes." He credited Roper House with enhancing his, quote, "appreciation of the value and importance of historic preservation," which led him to create our organization in 1993. Now, in order to understand the grandeur of Roper House, you need to realize that at the time of its completion in 1838, and for the next decade, there were no other houses located beyond it, just White Point Gardens and Charleston Harbor. This made Roper House the most prominent house and the first one that could be seen by visitors approaching the city by water, then a principal method of travel at that time. In fact, Roper House itself is built on what can best be described as reclaimed land. It's the approximate location is the yellow dot there on the map. The city of Charleston is, of course, situated on a peninsula with the Ashley River to its left and the Cooper River to its right on our map here. The southernmost tip of that peninsula had been the site of defensive fortifications since the 1730s, when the colonial government constructed a large brick fortification known as Broughton's Battery. Before that time, the city of Charleston didn't very much extend beyond the present-day Water Street, the location of a tidal creek, but White Point was a logical and strategic location for the city's defense. It offered an ideal vantage point to guard the harbor, and some well-placed cannons could easily halt an enemy fleet from sailing into the harbor to attack the city. Remember, all of South Carolina was a British colony, and several other European nations, especially Spain and France, were eager to expand their own holdings in North America. In 1785, the city announced a plan to extend East Bay Street approximately 1,000 feet toward White Point. The proposed route, now East Battery Street, was located outside of an existing seawall, and even at low tide, much of the land was underwater. So a new seawall was proposed, but several attempts were subsequently demolished by hurricanes. A new plan commenced in 1808 that involved the construction of a seawall using blocks of granite imported from the northern states. This battery seawall was completed at the end of 1818 and then further modified in 1855. For the next 20 years after its completion, the land behind the high battery was vacant. In 1836, Charleston city government announced plans to turn the vacant land into a public garden. However, an economic downturn in 1837 forced a change in the plans, and the park was limited to a much smaller space at the southern tip of the peninsula. The city subdivided the reclaimed land on East Battery Street into 9 lots, which they sold to finance the park. Now, one of the buyers of those lots was planter Robert W. Roper and his wife, Martha. A contemporary in Charleston, Frederick Adolphus Porcher, recalled Roper in his memoirs, saying that he was, quote, "a valued friend," and described him as, quote, "a very intelligent man who never received credit for as much intelligence as he really possessed." Roper's wife, Martha Rutledge Lawrence Roper, was the granddaughter of 2 of South Carolina's distinguished Revolutionary War era patriots, John Rutledge and Henry Lawrence. In 1838, the Ropers purchased 2 of the lots along the newly extended street that, as I mentioned, is known today as East Battery. The house that Roper constructed was tight to the property line, so in August of 1839, he purchased an additional 11 feet of frontage from his neighbor Isaac Holmes. As I noted earlier, Roper's house was the first house that was visible when entering Charleston by water for a decade after its completion, and it certainly makes a statement. Architecturally, the house retains elements of the vernacular Charleston single house, typically oriented with its gable end along the street and the longer side perpendicular to the street, the result of the long, narrow residential lots laid out in the city in the late 17th century. In this orientation, dependencies like kitchens and carriage houses were often placed behind the house in sort of a linear format, as illustrated in this plan of 134 Church Street. It also positioned the houses to take advantage of the prevailing southerly breezes, wholly necessary in the often oppressive hot and humid summers in Charleston. A Charleston single house will also typically have a covered two-story porch, known as a piazza. For Roper House, the traditional double-tiered piazza of the Charleston single house is replaced with a full-height portico. Also, what's remarkable about Roper House is that the portico is not on the front of the house, as you typically encounter in most Greek Revival buildings, but it's along the side, like the earlier Georgian and Federal Charleston single houses in the city. The architect who designed Roper House can't be positively identified at present. Some have proposed that Charles Reichardt, the Prussian architect who designed the Charleston Hotel and the Meeting Street Theater, as a likely candidate, but it's also very likely that Roper House is the work of Edward B. White, an attribution first made in 1953 by Samuel Stoney. White designed the well-known Market House, as well as other churches and residential buildings throughout the city of Charleston. Behind the house, a dependency structure seen here in a later 19th century photo served as a carriage house, kitchen, and quarters for Roper's enslaved workers. According to the 1840 census, Roper had 8 enslaved individuals on the property, as well as 1 free person whom he employed. Roper contracted country fever at his plantation, probably malaria, and died just a few days later at his East Battery house. A member of St. Philip's Church, he was buried in the churchyard. According to the terms of his will, his wife received the 560-acre plantation on the Cooper River, 96 enslaved individuals, most of whom were on the plantation, and the city house. In 1851, Mrs. Roper sold the house to another widow named Mary Coachman Alston. By 1851, Mrs. Alston had been widowed for 42 years. She never remarried and owned Roper House for 8 years until her death in 1859, when her executors sold the property to the next door neighbor, William Ravenel. By the middle of the 19th century, 2 additional houses had been constructed on the lot southeast of Roper House, and the High Battery became a very popular spot for a leisurely stroll, as well as in the adjacent White Point Gardens. The Confederate bombardment of Fort Sumter, the opening volleys of the Civil War that occurred at 4:30 a.m. on April 12, 1861, happened within sight of Roper House. Diarist Mary Boykin Chestnut in Charleston during the bombardment watched from the rooftop of another house and described it in her diary. And once again, just like in the 18th century, the point at the tip of the peninsula became heavily fortified as the strategic point to defend Charleston against possible attack, except it wasn't the British or a Spanish fleet that the city was hoping to repel, but rather the US Navy. 2 large caliber Columbiad cannons were placed at this strategic location as part of the network of fortifications erected to guard the city and protect the surrounding harbor. The city was constantly bombarded by the Union Navy during the course of the war, which inflicted significant damage. During this time, Roper House, as well as other houses along East Battery, stood vacant. In the summer of 1864, Major Edward Manigault noted in his diary, Roper House has had the architectural projection of the porch blown away by a shell. In February of 1865, Confederate troops began evacuating the city of Charleston. General William Tecumseh Sherman and the Union Army had completed their march to the sea in Georgia and crossed into South Carolina. On February 17th, Confederate artillery and munitions too heavy to move were simply blown up. One of the Blakely cannons placed on the ramparts just down the street from Roper House was destroyed. The explosion sent fragments of metal shrapnel from the cannon's barrel sky high in all directions, and a large fragment came through the roof at Roper House to rest in the attic, where it remains today. In 1874, Ravenel sold Roper House to Rudolph Septimius Seigling. Seigling could easily occupy a lecture of his own or several. The son of a German immigrant and musical instrument maker, Rudolph was born in Charleston in 1839. He was many things: a lawyer, bank president, railroad president, publisher of Charleston's News and Courier newspaper, and a Civil War veteran. Seigling was part of the well-established German-American community affiliated with Charleston's German Friendly Society and St. John's Lutheran Church, seen here. Seigling's father, Johann, had arrived in Charleston in 1819. A native of Erfurt, Germany, he trained in Paris with Sebastian Erard as a musical instrument maker and gained additional experience in London. Soon after arriving in Charleston, he opened Seigling's Music House on King Street, supplying generations of Charlestonians with pianos. His descendants continued to operate this business for the next 150 years. Johann and his wife, Maria, had 7 children, and it's evident that they'd run out of middle names by the time Rudolph, their youngest, was born in 1839, as he was given the middle name Septimius, denoting his place in the birth order. Rudolph's sister Marie was a composer and performer known as Charleston's Jenny Lind. She made her home in Dresden, the cultural capital of Saxony, where she and her husband, a French professor, became friends with noted composers, including Wagner, the Schuberts, and Franz Liszt. And they even included inaugural performances of 2 of Wagner's operas, where the composer directed the orchestra. Rudolph's brother Henry took over the family business in Charleston and expanded it to include the publication of sheet music and music books. Another sister, Eliza, married into the Holbeck family, another prominent German-American family who were architects and builders responsible for some of the most important buildings in the city. And Rudolph was educated at the classical school of German-born professor Augustus Sachtleben and at the College of Charleston, eventually deciding to pursue a career in medicine. However, the sudden death of his older brother, John, a lawyer, led Rudolph to read law and pursue a legal career. He passed the bar, but then he enlisted for service in the Confederate Army in August of 1861, serving as a second lieutenant in a German artillery unit that was mustered in Charleston. During the Second Battle of Bull Run, which took place near Manassas, Virginia, on August 30th of 1862, the regiment was given orders to advance as part of the Confederate assault. Lieutenant Seigling, then 22, was severely wounded when an artillery shell exploded and a piece of metal shrapnel ripped open his stomach. The company surgeon found him lying in a cornfield between the rows of corn with an abdominal wound that was 11 inches in length. The injury was so severe that he wasn't expected to survive. In the after-action report, Confederate Chief of Artillery Major Froebel commented that Seigling set, quote, an example of cool bravery not often equaled. Carried off the field on a stretcher to a nearby field hospital, he dictated his will, and a coffin was constructed for him from the boards of a nearby fence. A Charleston newspaper even ran this obituary for him. His medical knowledge certainly saved his life, as he ingested morphine immediately after receiving the wound to avoid going into shock, and later apparently discussed his treatment with the surgeons and doctors who were treating him at the field hospital. And remember, this is a Civil War field hospital where there was really no understanding of bacteria and limited understanding of infection. And he's got an open abdominal wound that's filled with dirt and debris from this explosion. According to Dr. John Summers Buist, the surgeon attached to the regiment, his wound was rinsed out regularly with fresh spring water and bandaged until it healed by second intention. The father of Seigling's commanding officer wrote to Edmund Ruffin and said that Seigling was one of the few men who had, quote, read his own obituary. After nearly a year of recovery, Seigling returned to his unit just before the Battle of Gettysburg, where the German artillery supported the unsuccessful Confederate charge up Little Round Top in a position along Bushman Farm Lane, seen here. After the war and the defeat of the Confederacy, Seigling returned to Charleston to practice law. In 1867 and again in 1872, he traveled abroad to visit his sister Marie and other relatives in Germany, applying for this passport before making the trip. Back in Charleston, he served on the board of directors for the City Railway Company, a trustee of the College of Charleston, and as I mentioned, editor of the News and Courier newspaper. Ironically, that same newspaper under its earlier name was the one that prematurely published his obituary in 1861. The 1880 census indicates that Seigling was living at Roper House along with his widowed mother, Marie, his sister Eliza and her family, and an African-American butler named Richard Maxwell. Sometime between 1880 and 1885, Rudolph married Effie Campbell of Summerville, South Carolina, and they eventually had 2 children, seen here. During Seigling's ownership of Roper House, he undertook renovations to the house and grounds, such as the installation of the iron fence that ran in front of the house that you still see today along East Battery Street. Following the earthquake of 1886 that I described at the onset of my lecture, the cracked masonry was repaired and patera plates were installed to further stabilize the house. And I especially love this photo from that era, which shows the front facade of Roper House covered with scaffolding right after the earthquake. And you can see they're making the repairs, and the Ravenel house next door, you can still see some of the ruins from it laying about in the yard and the street. Seigling also had the damaged two-story dependency demolished, and in its place, he constructed a rear addition to the main house, which featured a ballroom 60 feet in length on the second floor and 2 additional bed chambers above it on the third floor. The ballroom was filled with his art collection, primarily copies of works found in the celebrated Dresden Gallery. Seigling's copies were made by a German painter who later established a studio in Charleston, John Stoll. Other improvements included a new front door with his initials etched in the glass and lyre-shaped ironwork, a note to the family's music business. Here are some more images of the interior. Here's the double parlor, the room that's presently the double parlor, decorated during his era, and the entrance hall with that great gasolier up just above the banister there. In 1887, Rudolph and Effie purchased a summer home in Flat Rock, North Carolina. Located in Henderson County, the village of Flat Rock was a very popular area for low-country residents to spend the summer months and escape the heat and humidity of Charleston, even earning the nickname the Little Charleston of the Mountains. Known originally as Saluda Cottages, the house the Seiglings acquired was originally constructed in 1836 by the French consul stationed in Charleston and later owned by Christopher Memminger. The Seiglings enlarged the house, adding a third story and giving it the present Second Empire style, renaming the house Sanssouci after the palace of King Frederick the Great of Prussia. Rudolf Seigling suffered a stroke and died on March 14, 1894. The couple's only daughter, Effie, tragically, who was a namesake for her mother, died less than 2 years later of typhoid fever at the East Battery House in December of 1896. Mrs. Seigling remained in Roper House until her death in 1919, at which point the property passed to their son Rudolph Jr., seen here. This particularly interesting image, taken during the early 20th century, shows the interior of the first floor rooms. You can see the gas lights fixtures, the gasoliers on the wall, a hint of a coal stove at the far left, and a really interesting mix of furniture, a Federal sideboard, a late Empire sofa, even some Gothic Victorian pieces there in the front room. And here in the foreground, some oak American arts and crafts furniture. That bookcase there on the left is probably a Stickley triple bookcase, and the tables and chairs may be Stickley pieces as well. Just a really interesting mix of furniture there. Rudolph Seigling Jr. died in 1926, and 3 years later, his widow sold Roper House to Solomon Guggenheim. Now, if that name sounds familiar, it's because of this New York museum that was established with his collection of modern art. The sale price of the house at its 1929 purchase was the highest price paid for a residence in the city of Charleston at that time, $75,000. Born in Philadelphia in 1861 to Swiss immigrant parents, Solomon Guggenheim was educated in Zurich and later returned to the United States to work in the family's mining business. In 1895, he married Irene Rothschild, the daughter of a German immigrant who owned a very successful manufacturing business for ready-made clothing. In 1912, Solomon's younger brother, Benjamin Guggenheim, died in the sinking of the Titanic, but he's remembered by survivors for dressing in his best evening wear as he prepared to go down with the ship. Just 2 years before purchasing Roper House, Guggenheim, then in his 60s, began collecting modern art. He had first started collecting old masters in French landscapes in the late 19th century. However, under the guidance of Baroness Hilla von Riebe, he began to focus on what was originally called non-objective art, making his first purchase in 1927 and assembling an amazing collection, really, that became the basis for the New York Museum. After his retirement from business, Mr. and Mrs. Guggenheim used South Carolina as a winter getaway. In the mid-1920s, Guggenheim had purchased a 12,000-acre plantation south of Walterboro that he used for hunting, fishing, and riding. Roper House would become the winter residence for the couple, and like their Long Island estate, a place for them to escape New York City. After purchasing the house, the Guggenheims undertook a number of improvements. Architect Philip Cusack of New York was hired to create a scheme to split the Seigling ballroom into 3 additional guest rooms with adjoining bathrooms on the second floor. He was also tasked with finding a suitable location for the installation of an electric elevator. Roper has an amazing grand staircase, but both Mr. and Mrs. Guggenheim were seniors at the time they purchased the house, so the elevator offered an alternative to always taking the stairs to the 3rd floor bedchambers. The kitchen and bathrooms were modernized, and the dining room on the 2nd floor during the Seigling era was returned to the 1st floor, where it is today. The front room on the 1st floor, and this is my favorite space of this era, was converted to a gun room featuring dark paneling, leather-covered furniture, and storage cases for Mr. Guggenheim's hunting and fowling equipment. Extant images show the house furnished with a mix of American and British antiques and works of art. And at the rear of the yard, a hexagonal tea house was constructed with a roof covered with sheets of copper, a nod to the metal that was the source of Guggenheim's wealth. During Guggenheim's residency at Roper House, Charleston's Gibbs Museum of Art hosted 2 important exhibitions of his art collection. The 1936 show was the first formal exhibition of Guggenheim's collection and included works by Chagall, Leger, and Kandinsky, bringing international attention to the collection and Charleston. The exhibit was curated by Hilda Uribe, Guggenheim's art advisor, who would go on to become the first director of the New York Museum. The 1938 Gibbs exhibit was equally lauded and included works by Picasso, Seurat, and Modigliani from Mr. Guggenheim's collection that are now also in the collection of the New York Museum. Mrs. Guggenheim played an equally active role in building the collection, and according to one source, it was Mrs. Guggenheim who initially championed Frank Lloyd Wright to design the New York Museum, a building that's continued to be one of his late career masterpieces. Solomon Guggenheim died in 1949, and 3 years later, his executors sold Roper House to Mr. and Mrs. John Drayton Hasty. The Hasties owned Charleston's Magnolia Gardens and used Roper as their city house, living on the 3rd floor and transforming the main floor into a living space for Mrs. Hasty's widowed mother, a true grande dame of Charleston. Mr. Jenrette wrote that her, quote, elegant lifestyle epitomized the best of Charleston living. Each evening, Mrs. Hasty, dressed for dinner, would offer libations of evening bourbon and was known for throwing elegant parties which spilled out of the double parlors and onto the adjacent piazza. Photos from the Hasty era in the mid-20th century show the house very tastefully decorated with antiques and works of art, as you see here. As I told you at the beginning of my lecture, Mr. Jenrette recalled seeing Roper House during an evening stroll with its, quote, massive 2-story Ionic columns glittering in the moonlight, the biggest he said he had ever seen on a private residence. The following day, Jenrette met with the owner and arranged to purchase the house. As part of the purchase agreement, Mrs. Hasty, the widowed mother, was given a life tenancy on the 2nd floor, while Jenrette and his partner Bill Thompson used the 3rd floor during their weekend visits to Charleston. And this was the arrangement for the next 12 years until Mrs. Hasty's passing. Jenrette's friend and interior designer, Anthony Hale of San Francisco, decorated the 3rd floor living space at Roper House, utilizing an eclectic mix of English and Asian decorative arts. Now, this was before Mr. Jenrette had undergone what he called his conversion to Americana, where he narrowed his collecting focus to 19th century classical New York furniture. So his early collecting was varied and often influenced by people like Hale, Georgia architect Edward Vason Jones, or Greensboro designer Otto Zinke, who had worked on some of Jenrette's earlier New York residences. Anthony Hale was born in Texas, but grew up in Denmark, later returning to the United States, where he attended Harvard Graduate School of Design, and then he moved to San Francisco in the 1950s, where he opened his own design firm. He'd previously worked on several earlier projects for Mr. Jenrette, including Edgewater, the Hudson Valley House, and several New York City houses as well. It was, and Anthony Hale really credited his time in San Francisco for influencing his approach to mixing Chinese decorative arts with classical antiques and contemporary fabrics, as you see in this Architectural Digest photo of his own residence in San Francisco. Anthony Hale was also working with Mr. Jenrette on the Mills House Hotel, a reconstruction of the historic Charleston Hotel that Mr. Jenrette served as lead investor on, which opened in 1970. Excuse me, I'm going to take my jacket off here. After Mrs. Hasty's death in 1981, Mr. Jenrette and Thompson spent 2 years renovating and redecorating the second floor spaces, including the double parlor that spans the length of the house. By this time, Jenrette had narrowed his collecting focus and filled those spaces with the important examples of classical New York furniture that he'd acquired. Decorator David Richmond Byers of Atlanta, who had previously designed window treatments for both the White House and the State Department's diplomatic reception rooms, designed the stunning blue and gold curtains for Roper House's floor-to-ceiling windows that provide sweeping views of Charleston's harbor. Decorative painter Robert Jackson faux marbled wall surfaces to resemble ashlar blocks and decorated the wooden floors. And Jenrette's partner Bill Thompson designed the wall-to-wall carpets, incorporating neoclassical motifs for the rooms that were produced by Scalamandre, whose fabric was also used to upholster the Duncan Five furniture found throughout the rooms. By the mid-1980s, Dick Jenrette owned a number of historic properties. He had purchased Edgewater in 1969, Airmount in Hillsborough in 1985, and that same year he acquired Cane Garden, a plantation dating to the 18th century on the island of St. Croix. And then in 1992, he added Milford to the portfolio. And he also owned a succession of historic townhouses in Manhattan that he used as his primary city residences. But he credited his 1968 purchase of Roper House as the catalyst for both of his lifelong hobbies, collecting old houses and American decorative arts to furnish them. Shortly after Jenrette completed the redecoration of the house, the third floor living space became the home of his 90-year-old mother, who spent the final decade of her life living there. Mrs. Jenrette even remained on the third floor of Roper House through the September 1989 landfall of Hurricane Hugo. The city of Charleston has been no stranger to hurricanes. Since official National Weather Service records began in 1851, 41 storm events made landfall in Charleston. 25 were hurricanes and 16 were tropical storms. Historical accounts of storms prior to 1851 records indicate another 12 major hurricanes going back as far as 1686. That year, a fleet of Spanish ships planning to attack the English settlement at Charlestown was repelled by and forced to return to St. Augustine because of a hurricane. Just after midnight on September 22nd, 1989, exactly 32 years ago yesterday, Hurricane Hugo made its landfall as a Category 4 hurricane on Sullivan's Island, just north of downtown Charleston. Peak wind gusts in downtown were 120 miles per hour. And peak storm tides were 10 to 12 feet above the mean sea level in the harbor, resulting in water surging over the seawall, as seen in this painting by artist Jim Booth. While rainfall was limited due to the fast motion of the storm, the wind and peak storm tides caused significant damage, with many houses losing roofs and widespread flooding. Roper House is located less than 60 feet from Charleston Harbor. Anytime water breaches the seawall, it threatens all of the houses in this part of the city, especially those on this area of reclaimed former marshland. That night, 32 years ago, the first floor of Roper House was inundated with 5 feet of water. So this line just kind of shows the approximation of where the water would have been on the first floor. And the resulting storm surge swept away the garden, seen here in a pre-Hugo photo. As I noted earlier, Jenrette's 97-year-old mother rode out the storm on the third floor of the house. After power went out, he telephoned her from New York every 20 minutes with weather updates, but Roper House survived. Another survivor was the collection of furniture. The day before Hugo made landfall, the caretaker had moved everything from the first floor up to the second floor of the house, ensuring its survival. As soon as floodwaters receded, work began to repair the damage, as Roper House was expecting a very high-profile visitor. Charles, the Prince of Wales, heir to the British throne, was going to stay at Roper House during a planned visit to Charleston just a few months away. Inside the house, rewiring, plastering, and painting commenced to get it ready for the royal visitor. Outside, a new garden was designed and quickly installed by landscape architect Chip Calloway of Greensboro to replace the one that Hugo had obliterated. Calloway's design utilized mature palmetto and magnolia trees that were hoisted by crane over to the wall in the middle of the night so as not to disrupt traffic on East Battery Street. All was completed in time for Charles' visit in February of 1990. Here's a photo of him taken with Dick Jenrette in the first floor reception room at Roper House. As Charles later wrote, Roper House displays not only Mr. Jenrette's commitment to preserving the best of America's architectural heritage, but also his extraordinary collection of classical American art, antiques, and other furnishings. During the stay, interested locals gathered outside of Roper House to try to catch a glimpse of the heir to the throne. For all you fans of The Crown, this photo is displayed in the third floor bedroom at Roper House, where Charles stayed, obviously signed and with the Prince of Wales feathers, his monogram, I guess his logo. Another member of the royal family, Charles' younger sister Anne, the Princess Royal, also stayed at Roper House during her visit to Charleston. And speaking of British visitors, the Iron Lady herself, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, seen here with Mr. Jenrette, visited Roper House when she came to Charleston in 1994. Dick Jenrette hosted a number of notable international figures at Roper House during his 50 years of ownership, including presidents of the United States, the Emperor and Empress of Japan, and here he is chatting with Desmond Tutu, then Archbishop of Cape Town, South Africa. And in 2017, he hosted Sir Julian Fellows, best known as the creator of Downton Abbey. After he retired from Wall Street, Jenrette and Bill Thompson frequently traveled and spent a portion of the year at each of their houses. Mr. Jenrette wrote about his role stewarding his collection of historic houses, saying that he, quote, felt grateful for the years I've been given to watch over and enjoy these beautiful places, preserving them for the future as part of America's architectural heritage. Jenrette passed away at Roper House in April of 2018, and in accordance with his wishes, the house and collection transferred to Classical American Homes Preservation Trust. Today, Roper House serves as a learning laboratory for the next generation of architectural historians, preservationists, curators, and students in related disciplines. In 2019, graduate students from Clemson University College of Charleston's graduate program in historic preservation completed a historic structure report of Roper House. And there's some great current research and things going on right now. So I'll encourage everyone to follow along via social media to kind of see our latest updates on a lot of these projects, not only at Roper House, but at all of our properties. In addition to gaining a better understanding of the architectural and occupational history of Roper House, we're also thinking about the future. One thing, of course, on everyone's mind is and has always been hurricanes and the resulting storm surge, given Roper's proximity to Charleston Harbor. Even in the past 5 years, there have been several flooding events resulting from Hurricanes Matthew in 2016, seen here, and Irma in 2017. But storm surge isn't the only threat. Rising sea levels and king tides resulting in flooding on even the sunniest of days, as seen here. This was exactly just about a year ago, I believe, last September. And then we can look at models like this one that show what will happen to the city if sea levels rise. This one just shows just a 3-foot level of the sea rising. And you can see that water is already up into Roper House and a number of the other properties in the vicinity as well. Earlier this year, the Army Corps of Engineers released their coastal flood risk management study of the Charleston Peninsula, which includes recommendations for several measures to prevent future flooding, like the construction of an enhanced seawall. The project is presently in the public review stage, and a number of organizations have weighed in on how the proposed plans will impact everything from cultural resources to coastal wildlife. Hopefully, the final solution that everyone agrees upon will be able to prevent another Hugo-like storm surge, but also successfully preserve the historic viewscapes from the High Battery and other parts of the city that evoke Charleston's centuries-old role as a port city. Since Roper House is presently closed due to the COVID-19 pandemic, I wanted to take you on a brief virtual tour and show you some of the interior spaces. The entrance hall features a grand staircase that provides access to the second and third floors. Off the entrance hall is the reception room and a dining room with an adjacent modern kitchen. Like many Charleston homes, the principal entertaining spaces are on the second floor. So here's the second floor landing. From here, you step into the double parlor, which runs the length of the house. And of course, the piazza is accessible off the parlor. Excuse me. Going back to the landing and up to the third floor, Mr. Jenrette's master bedroom is up here at the front of the house with its amazing view of the harbor and Fort Sumter out there. And you can see it through the window. Another bedchamber was transformed into a library with comfortable overstuffed couches that Jenrette described as the perfect place to spend a rainy Charleston day. A kitchenette is located off this space, and additional bedrooms are further down the hall. Another door leads up to the attic and the roof deck, a space that Jenrette installed in the 1970s, providing one of the best locations for a sunset cocktail in Charleston, in my opinion. I should also mention that Roper House had a bit of a starring role on the second season of the Bravo reality show Southern Charm, when one of the individuals on the show lived in the back apartment. Now, I think in closing, I'll say one of the things that makes Roper House so fascinating is the layers of history and the various individuals who both lived and labored here. It survived war, natural disasters, and even played an indirect role in the introduction of modern art to the United States, as well as an important role in the preservation community, as it's what really got Dick Jenrette interested in preservation and restoration, and it's what led him to create our organization, Classical American Homes Preservation Trust. So with that, I'll be happy to take any questions. I do want to mention the two books that were mentioned. Of course, Columns by the Sea is the book by Mr. Jenrette specifically about Roper House. And then there's Adventures with Old Houses, his book that looks at all of the houses that he acquired, restored, and his adventures in reacquiring some of the objects for them as well, which is just, it's fascinating. They're both great books. I also want to mention our website and invite you to follow us on Instagram to, again, follow along with all the great stuff that Classical American Homes is doing. In case you missed any of my earlier lectures from this series about our other properties, Airmount, Edgewater, and Milford, here are the links to those, so you can screenshot those or just search for them on YouTube. I believe the museum has posted them. And also just some recommended books for further reading if you want to get more details about anything that I've mentioned tonight. So with that, I'm going to end my screen sharing here. And we'll be happy to take some questions if people have them.
All right. Hello, it's me, the intern. The only question we have so far is there any talk of reopening the Roper House in the near future?
As I mentioned, of course, all of our properties are still presently closed due to the COVID pandemic. I would just tell people to keep checking back on our website, that all of our information about reopening and stuff, once it's all finalized, that will be the best source to look at that.
Any questions at all relating to anyone who lived in the house, about the house itself, the history relating to it? Was the brick locally made?
That is a great question. I believe it was. I'm not entirely sure. I'm the first to confess I'm not the architectural historian of our group. I'm the curator, but yeah, I believe it was.
What are the plans for Roper House in the future?
Again, as I discussed, have it open for visitation. We're again still finalizing all those plans as far as its reopening, but on a limited basis. And then also, again, to continue to use it as a laboratory for, again, this up and coming generation of people in various disciplines, architectural history, curators, preservationists, who want to learn about some of the techniques that we're going to be employing to both preserve this property and our other properties as well.
Okay, getting a few more here.
Okay.
Which was Mr. Jenrette's favorite home?
I think he liked all of them. I'm going back to see, I think asking him to pick a favorite house would be like asking a parent to pick a favorite child. But yeah, I think each of them had an attraction to him. I think, something about Roper House that was always special is it's the first one that he acquired and restored. And as I think it's pretty amazing that, he wasn't even 40 years old when he bought this house. And I think that's pretty amazing too. And the fact that, again, he owned it for 50 years. It was a home that he and Bill would continue to come back to for all that time.
We have Carol Hanner says, what is the most prominent piece of art that is still in the house?
Oh, there are some amazing pieces of art in the house, a number of Charleston-centric portraits. There are of several people. I would say of all of our houses, it's probably the one where we have the least amount of original objects associated with the earliest owners. I mean, it's got a great collection. It's got an amazing collection, but when you compare it to Edgewater that has, a number of original pieces commissioned for it, the same with Milford, Airmount that has a number of family pieces. I think because, it went through a succession of owners too. I mean, there are a couple of pieces, but yeah, some great furniture too. Again, some amazing pieces of Duncan Fife New York furniture, some great pieces of Deming and Bulkley and other Charleston pieces in the house. But yeah, it's a great house.
I guess a related question would be, did Mr. Jenrette acquire any art for Roper House, specifically for the house? I'm guessing.
Yes, actually, the painting I showed a couple of times, Felix Kelly, who was a noted British painter, actually painted views of several of Mr. Jenrette's houses, including that one of Roper House that I showed. And trying to think, that's the one that comes to mind.
And is the furniture primarily from South Carolina?
A lot of the furniture, like I said, is New York. Mr. Jenrette's really, he and Bill's collecting focus was classical New York furniture. So pieces of furniture by Duncan Fife, Lon Yue, Michael Allison, those many of Duncan Fife's competitors in New York. But we do have, again, we have a Deming and Buckley piece, a couple of other Charleston pieces that come to mind in the house as well. But yes, so a good mix of furniture.
Do we have any highlights or points of interest from the historic structure report that was compiled by the grad students that you mentioned?
Yeah, it was a great document, and it, like I said, you can really see that Roper House has got this fantastic history, and each owner really left sort of their own mark on Roper House, from the Ropers to the Seiglings to, of course, the sorry, I'm completely blanking here. But, and of course, Mr. Jenrette and Mr. Thompson, who, of course, owned it for one of the lengthiest periods of ownership, too. And, of course, the Guggenheims as well. And we're so fortunate that we have, for the later 19th and 20th century occupations of the house, and the Hasties as well, too, great photo documentation. So we can see those spaces. And that's one of the things that fascinates me as a curator for any historic house, and has always fascinated me with the historic houses where I've worked during my career, is to be able to look at just the layers of history for these houses, and how each person that owned it decorated it, furnished it, and how it changes through time.
We have Liz asking, what happened to all the furniture from previous eras? It was redecorated so many times.
Yeah, the individuals, it was probably sold as part of estate sales and stuff, and that's definitely some research that's ongoing, just to get a better idea of these occupational histories. Again, some of them were fairly short. If you think about it, the house is completed in 1838, 1839. Roper himself dies in 1845, and then his wife only lives there for another 5 or 6 years. I'm trying to do math here while I'm thinking, but yeah.
I guess the sort of a follow-up to that is from Diane is how much of it have you been able to return much of that to the house, well, the original furniture?
Still looking at identifying it. I think there's a lot of potential, especially with looking at Seigling's art collection that's pretty well documented, and just looking to see what sort of documentation exists for some of the earlier owners of the houses as well. And that's to me, and I know a number of other people on watching this, that's a very fun kind of project and that kind of research and stuff. So stay tuned for more. That's what I'll say about that.
All right. And we have also how was the house maintained during the Civil War? I guess, day to day.
It was actually, that's a great question. That's something we want to learn more about too. Like I said, all the houses along East Battery were pretty much abandoned because, that whole area was being shelled. And so not a lot of people wanted to be living there. And I think it fell into some disrepair. But again, that's something we're trying to get a better understanding of as we understand the chronology of the house.
This is not really a question, but it's framed as one. I am surprised that the ballroom is carpeted.
Oh, that's an
moving on, I guess you mentioned that Mr. Jenrette filled Roper with New York classical furniture. Where would he get most of it, and where would it have come from originally?
He was collecting actually, as he describes it, really, it was when he purchased Edgewater in 1969 that he sort of underwent this conversion to Americana, and it was antiquing. He and Bill antiquing around Dutchess County, New York, where Edgewater is located. So he's primarily living in New York City, so he's going to a number of galleries there. He's going to auction houses there. He's going antiquing. They were going antiquing around all of these properties that they owned, and so collecting from a variety of places. Some pieces he acquired from descendants of the original owners. Some pieces, from a number of places. And really, like I said, when he first furnished Roper House, it was a little more eclectic as far as the variety of European, Asian decorative arts and antiques. And you still see that to a degree, as opposed to some of the other houses but then as he really underwent this conversion, he was substituting out pieces and putting more and more pieces of his American collection at Roper House.
Is there any mystery to the house? I don't know if they mean things you just don't know, or
like Scooby-Doo kind of mystery, or no, historical mysteries. Yes. I mean, there's a lot of things we're still trying to find out. And again, that's what I love about this kind of research on these houses, is we can find a brand new document tomorrow that completely rewrites the history of it and leads us in a completely different way of thinking about things. Some of the, one of the images that I shared of that back building, a very recently uncovered image of that shows some great details of it. We've got great details of the landscape in some of those images. You can see the outhouse that was there, that was taken down in the early 20th century, but existed prior to that. And you see what looks like a greenhouse. So these images are great for looking at the landscape too. And that's what's great about right after the 1886 earthquake. There's a great body of photo documentation of sort of a lot of the properties and stuff that were damaged in just the city as well, it's a fascinating topic.
Are the press or periodicals allowed to photograph there? As a photography editor, I was fortunate enough to obtain permission just prior to Hugo to photograph a bridal shoot on the piazza for Southern Bridge magazine, which became Elegant Bride, a division of Pace Communications in Greensboro, NC. And this is from Jane.
I would tell that individual to contact our website if they're asking about photography permission and stuff. That can be found on there.
Pardon me, it's going to be having some connection issues.
Yeah,
Sorry about that.
I see that's okay.
Duncan and Fife.
I was going to say, I see that a question about the outbuildings. The Guggenheim era tea house is still there. There's a 20th century garage that's there. And no, the apartment is not still a rental property, but it was previously. I'm just looking at some of the other questions here. But I see someone asking the question about plans for the future to address flooding and climate change. Like I said, that's something I think that everybody in Charleston is thinking about. And, Yeah, I see somebody else is asking what Mrs. Jenrette did during Hugo. I mean, I just think it's amazing. She was up on the third floor. Mr. Jenrette there's a great story that came out in the New York Times where he talks about this. It came out the following year in 1990. And he said she described the house was literally quivering during that. And I can imagine if there's 120-mile winds and, 5 feet of water is inundating the first floor of the house.
I see at least two questions about if there's any other plans relating to like the future of climate change and preserving, I guess, the whole East Battery area, not just the house itself.
Yeah, I would say that's, I don't feel like I can address that, but I would say there, as I mentioned, a number of organizations have been looking at that Army Corps of Engineers study and offering suggestions. That's it's in the public commentary period now. I encourage people to, there's some great media coverage about that, but I think it is, something that the city is thinking about because, this wall that they built in that was, last modified in the 1850s is now, not substantial enough. And, what needs to be done for the future. And yeah, it's.
Was any of the ironwork made by Philip Simmons?
I do not believe, but that's a great question though. And yeah, Philip Simmons, great Charleston iron worker for people unfamiliar with him.
And we have a question, is the Roper House part of any ghost tours that Charleston is so famous for?
No, and I don't think it will be either. That's not something that we as a museum will probably participate in.
Can you speak to the oldest piece of furniture or art that's still in the house?
That's a good question. I'm going through kind of room by room here, thinking about. There is an early 19th century Charleston chest of drawers in one of the spaces, and a Sully portrait of. This is me trying to think after. Of a Mrs. Lowndes, that's an early 19th century portrait as well. And I could have given a whole separate lecture on just the collection at Roper House, because again, it's a number of fascinating pieces. And I will say that Classical American Homes will be debuting a new website fairly soon. And one feature of that is going to be a publicly accessible collections catalog. So you'll be able, if you want to see what kind of objects are at Roper House, you can search this collections catalog and look at catalog records for the painting that I mentioned, the pieces of furniture, that sort of thing.
I think we covered just about every question that got posted. And I think we're running short on time here.
Okay.
So I think we'll call it there. And I'll hand it over to Stacy.
Thank you, Bobby. And thank you, Grant, for this wonderful virtual trip to Roper House and for all the incredible talks that you've done for us about the homes that Classical American Homes Preservation Trust cares for. It's truly been a pleasure.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to share this great information too. And especially, as I said, since I've done this during a time where all of our properties have been closed due to COVID, to be able to give you all a little bit of a virtual peek into the houses until they're reopened. So.
We are anxiously waiting the days that they are open back so that we can all travel and go visit them. And thank you all of you who joined us for this evening's program. We hope that you enjoyed it. And we hope to see you at our next History and Highballs, Highlands, North Carolina, happening on Thursday, October 7th at 7 p.m. on Zoom. We hope that all of you have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you then. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.